Buddhist cosmology can be very confusing and also very distracting to Westerners. Why? Well, when we're talking about Buddhist cosmology, we're talking about worlds, we're talking about different realms and periods of time and a variety of different things which sound very supernatural, very unusual to Westerners. They're very scientifically minded. So they look at this like, well, this was just added afterwards. This isn't really Buddhism. Why is this even important? So the reason it's important is because it's showing us that everything is impermanent. We're showing dependent origination. We're showing lots of different Buddhist concepts, but it's the Buddha giving us a much broader understanding of this universe and this existence that we're in, and that our actions, our karma, our merits, this is going to be a key factor in essentially how we end up. If we are on this Buddhist path towards enlightenment, to realize nirvana and samsara and this cycle of rebirth, we have to really understand what's going on. Now, the Buddha was very focused on our development, right? And so where does this all play in? Is this kind of like a sideshow? Is this really important? I would say it's important, and it doesn't matter if you fully understand it right now, accept it, reject it. That's okay. You know, we're all learning about Buddhism. We're all at different levels. What we have to understand is this cosmology is very much part of Buddhism. In Theravada and Mahayana, it is part of Buddhism. Now, when we're talking about Buddhist cosmology, we could be here all day talking about it. It is very vast, it's very complex, there's lots to it, so I'm not going to cover everything today. I'm going to cover just a little bit. But when we look at this, we can also apply it to our life right now and our practice right now. So when we look at these 500 million Buddhists around the world, cosmology plays different roles in how they practice and how they understand and how they want to be a Buddhist, but they realize it's important based upon not this life, but future lives. So this cycle of rebirth. Now, let's start off at the very beginning. So Buddhist cosmology, it talks about this universe. And the universe, when we talk about that very scientifically, well, we have an understanding of the universe, right? But we don't really know everything. We think we know everything. We're constantly learning new things, and we'll go, oh wow, that's really interesting, but we don't really understand everything. When the Buddha and Bodhisattvas and other Buddhas talk about Buddhist cosmology, it's outside of this sort of scientific realm, if you will. So when we can see things with like space telescopes and radio telescopes and all the scientific understanding we're having and learning about our universe, that's one thing. That's kind of like our regular mundane type universe. When we talk about Buddhist cosmology, it's going beyond that. It's going to this much deeper fundamental level that we can't always see. Now, this comes into being very much with the realms of rebirth. And the realms of rebirth are important, whether you take it as literal or just as a teaching. This is important because as a Buddhist, and especially those 500 million Buddhists around the world, they're looking at what they're doing in this life right now as one step in this very long journey. Now, most Westerners are looking at this life right now as the end of the journey. Like, if I need to be enlightened right now in this lifetime, all this other stuff doesn't matter. That's not really the view of Buddhists around the world. Now, the realms of rebirth is why it's so important. We have 6 realms of rebirth that one can kind of pass through. Now, to really make your mind boggle. And so when you start understanding Buddhist cosmology and learning about all the different parts of it, it even to this day makes my mind boggle and hurt, because you're talking about immense periods of time, which I'll talk about. You're talking about all these different realms, which we're going to talk about here, but all these different things, and it's like, how is this possible? Like, what does this mean? And it's very hard for us with our lifespans in this existence right now, just a couple of decades. I mean, we're going to be lucky to get 60, 70, 80, maybe years old, right? That's just a couple of decades. We're talking about, in Buddhist cosmology terms, tens of millions of years up to trillions of years, which is a blink of an eye in Buddhist cosmology. So for us, in this cycle of rebirth, this is probably one of infinite number of existences that we have had. So not to go too much into my prior videos and talking about Buddhist concepts, but there's concepts of non-self and rebirth, right? So we are just a temporary grouping of things called the 5 aggregates, and its function still seamlessly called Namaprupa, that we believe this existence right now, there's something permanent, unchanging, and independent inside itself. And the Buddha said that's not true. So there is something that continues on, and that's your karma and the trace impressions of it. So there's a stored consciousness, if you will, that continues on, but it's not a soul or a self that we understand it as. So this has been going on just like these different, this string going along like a Buddhist mala bead, and all the little beads on there are like the different existences. Each one is separate, but there's something casually connecting them all together. So the realms of rebirth are important because we probably cycled through these realms of rebirth at different times. In the different realms of rebirth, 2 things, they're considered literal, but you can also figure it as your daily practice and how you exist in our world right now. Are you very hateful and greedy? Well, maybe you're cycling through in your mental state in one of these cycles of rebirth. But what we're talking about in the cycles of rebirth is what happens after this current existence, this current 5 aggregates falls apart and your karma, your stored consciousness continues on. What happens there? So the cycles, or the realms of rebirth, I should say, there's 6 different ones. So the very top level, if you will, is going to be the Devas, and so Devas are God's realm. And so this is one where, due to wholesome karmic activities, generosity, compassion, etc., you've done right, for example, in this life. And a good example is following the Buddhist teachings and taking it, doing the precepts, everything. You can get to that particular level. And for a lot of Buddhists around the world, they want to get to that level because there's different stages. You can just almost think of them as like layers, really. And so there's different stages there. And so the higher stages are going to be more pleasure-filled, and just there's points where you don't even have like what we may consider a body right now, for example, formless. And so when you're inside these realms, in the Deva's realm, there is a point where you can learn and understand more, right? And so we see in the Buddhist scriptures where the Buddha is talking to Devas. So Devas are coming and talking to the Buddha. They want to learn from him. Well, why would like this godlike being go down to a Buddha? Well, they're still in the cycle of rebirth. They're there due to their karma, their merits, their actions. But as soon as they burn it off, they can go right back to another realm, or they may go higher up, right? So there's different levels that they can continue on, but it's all impermanent. It's all part of the cycle of rebirth. So even in these pleasure-filled, very happy, if you will, type realms, you can still continue into any of the realms of rebirth. Now, the Devas, they're coming and talking to the Buddha because they want to advance. They want to hopefully become a Buddha as well. They want to get to these enlightened mental states. Just because they're a Deva and they're inside these heavenly God realms, right, doesn't mean they're like a creator God or they can influence things in that particular way. They're not like that. We don't have that in Buddhism. It's just anybody can get up there, right? So we also see, before I kind of continue on down to the human realm, you have different heavenly realms inside there. And there's one particular one that really plays into what we see with Bodhisattvas and Buddhas and stuff like that. So Shakyamuni Buddha or Gautama Buddha. So he came from a heavenly realm. So Bodhisattva, so our Buddha, the Buddha of our era right now, Shakyamuni Buddha, he was a Bodhisattva many times. In his last existence, he was in a heavenly realm, up in that Deva's realm, if you will, right, that godly realm. So he's in a heavenly realm, and this is where Bodhisattvas reside as well, where his next existence was going to be in the human realm, where he was right now, because the only way for him to become a Buddha, he was destined to be one. So the next existence was this one. This is the one where he was born Siddhartha Gautama, and this is where he became the Buddha. So you have it, and that's a great example right there, where he was up in this heavenly God realm, Deva realm, right? But as a Bodhisattva, came down to the human realm. Didn't stay, move forward. He came to this realm. So that brings us to the human realm. So the human realm is where you and me are right now, right? And this is pretty much one of the more fortunate realms. Well, why is that? Like, wasn't a Deva's realm like a better one? I mean, if you're just like pleasure filled and everything, well, you can learn, you can do things, right? But this is like the mud. And so lotus flowers are very symbolic in Buddhism for this reason. They're growing under the water. You don't see them. They're in this muddy water, right? But it's full of nutrients. And it's not very sunlight coming through. You can't see that, right? But as soon as they break through the water's surface, open up and bloom into a flower, enlightenment, nirvana, they're clean, they're beautiful, right? So without this mud, you can't become a Buddha, so to speak. So that's why the Bodhisattva who came to his next rebirth inside this realm, the human realm, as Siddhartha Gautama, came here because he wanted to become a Buddha for this era. And so it's sort of like this manifested body. There's 3 bodies of a Buddha inside Mahayana Buddhism, where basically one of them is this manifested body. So if he were just to come down, this Bodhisattva, that's not going to really do it for sentient beings like you and me. We need to have like this manifested body, not a manifested body where they just appear to us, but they actually are here like us because they are us. They came and there are 5 aggregates, and so like Shakyamuni Buddha, he was here only for a certain amount of time, and we saw that his body, his 5 aggregates, fell off. Now, did he no longer have continued rebirth? Absolutely. Especially in Mahayana, we see that he still continues on. There's the 3 bodies of the Buddha, like far as like his reward body and dharma body, that still exists, but like he's never going to manifest as like a human being again in this realm. So we see it where these manifested bodies, where the Buddhas become this manifested body as a Buddha. This is to help us as sentient beings. We need to see that physical. We need to see the similarity, right? So as human beings, we are in this fortunate realm, basically. It may not seem like it. It may be stressful, maybe pleasure-filled time, maybe very sad times, right? But this is basically the best realm to gain enlightenment, to realize nirvana. This is the realm because you have basically power over your karma. You can choose to do wholesome or unwholesome. On the other realms, not so much, especially even like in a Deva's realm. Like, yeah, they're going kind of like more to the extreme as well, right? This realm, you're sort of kind of in the middle. And basically what this means is, like I said, you have control over your karma. Now, do we practice that? No, that's why Buddhism is here. This is what the Buddhist teachings were, to show us this is the path, the Eightfold Path, for example, 6 perfections. This is to help us make our karma, make our actions, make our merits on this wholesome side. We have control over it. We're not like the other realms. Here we could actually do good. We could actually become enlightened. And so this is a really big thing. This is why we have like Arhats in Theravada. We also have Arhats in Mahayana, but also follow that Bodhisattva path, become a full Buddha. This is where we have decision-making powers. And so I've went on about the human realm just a little bit here. This is really important because in this life right now, we are so distracted by things, entertainment or just laziness or whatever. You name it, we have pleasures and we have hardships here, right? But we do have the Buddhist teachings. And so this is saying of all these realms of rebirth, that the human realm is a very, very rare opportunity in existence, and we shouldn't squander it. So if you're able to understand and practice Buddhism right now, you can basically start creating these right karmic conditions, generating merit to get you to like a heavenly realm, and other things that I'm going to talk about here in a second that can help us along the path, because you don't want to slip down to the lower realms where it's harder to even hear the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, or to practice it. This is where it's so important. It's either going to be at this human realm or above. If we start slipping down, we're going to lose the teachings to help us advance. That's why this realm is so important to us. That brings us down to the other realms, right? So we have like this Demigods realm right below us, where they're constantly battling kind of like what's the God's realm. There's sort of like a truth right now, but basically they're just trying to create conflict, right? But there's not Devas, but they're sort of like demigods, if you will. And so there you see kind of like, like a hatred, kind of coming up, right? So that's not where we want to go either. Then we also see kind of like this animals realm. And so it's very animalistic, there's impulses, right? And doing things. Well, we don't want to go there either. Then we see like a hungry ghost realm, and just like it sounds, hungry ghosts. And so they're insatiable appetite, like they just can't be satisfied, constantly clinging, craving, greedy, right? They're trying to satisfy this hunger for whatever it might be, whether it's food or pleasure or whatever, right? They just can't be satisfied. So it's a very miserable experience. And then you also got like this hell realm, the very bottom, right? And this is where if you like break the precepts or whatever else, you can be found inside these realms. Now, things like the hell realm and animal realm, like we look at this and we're like at the ghost realm, like, well, that must be it, right? And especially we have like our Western eyes about these type of terms. We're used to things like hell being forever, or maybe if you're a ghost, well, that's forever, you're a ghost, right? These are all impermanent, they're all part of the cycle of rebirth. You can spend some time in there, but it's not, as soon as you burn off that maybe bad karma, unwholesome karma, you cycle through the cycles of rebirth. So yes, you can advance up, but why would we want to get to these lower realms to begin with? We want to stay this human realm or above. So that's why the realms of rebirth are so important. And whether you believe in this literally or just like as a teaching, they're important, because if you look at our daily life right now, and as you go through your life and encounters and experiences, can you identify where your mental state might be on these cycles or these realms of rebirth? Maybe you are very greedy about something, and even when you got it, you know, you're like, well, I don't really care. Maybe you're the hungry ghost level, right, or realm. Or maybe you're like, well, I just want this, or whatever, you just like just filled with like, I just want something, right? Well, maybe animalistic. Maybe, you know, it's just you did something very bad. You broke one of the precepts, right? You're going to be that hell realm. So yes, there's an afterlife of this life, this existence right now in the cycle of rebirth that you can fall into, but you can see how it also applies to your mental state, to your entire conduct, lifestyle, well-being, practice, everything. And I feel that's why it's so important, these realms of rebirth. We can think of it as very much, oh, whatever, like, how does that even really apply? You can apply it. And for these Buddhists around the world, they do not want to go to the hell realm. They do not want to go to the animal realm. They don't want to go to these realms that are unhelpful, unsatisfactory in progressing on the Buddhist path. So they are encouragements as well to continue on the right path inside Buddhism. Now, what about like the times here, right? So if you're like in a Deva's realm, right, you can be there for an extremely long period of time, like a really long period of time, which can feel like a heaven, right, or sound like a heaven. Whereas like in our human realm, right, we can just be here for a couple of decades, or maybe like in an animal realm, maybe it's even shorter than that. So we're looking at periods of time inside Buddhism. For us as humans, we're very used to decades of life, whereas maybe like a little fly that maybe may live a day or a week or something like that, well, our lifetime may sound as a human like it must be like a god. They're living for so long. How's it even imaginable, right? So the Buddha gave like this one sermon, this one teaching. He had like this like, just imagine this big rock or boulder like 19 miles wide or something like that. And you had a feather, and every 100 years you just brush it across this big boulder, right? And he's like, the amount of time it takes for it to wear down is kind of like the periods of time we're talking about inside Buddhism. So we have Kalpas. And so we're in a fortunate Aeon right now. And we've already had 4 Buddhists. Shakyamuni Buddha is our current one right now. We'll have another one in this fortunate Aeon, which is going to be Maitreya. And so he'll be after the current Buddhist teachings are lost, so we're talking about a long time from now, he will come and he'll be the next Buddha of this particular era. And so when we're looking at periods of time, these kalpas, there's these eons are just from like 16 million years long in like a traditional sense up to like 1 trillion long, and like in a great kalpa. And so we're looking at these and it's just unimaginable, but like as they play into Buddhist cosmology, they're like these realms of rebirth. We have been going through this for 1 trillion years or even longer. We can't even imagine how long it could actually be. So when we look at the Buddha and his past life tales, and so as a fully awakened, enlightened being like the Buddha, they can see Devas, for example. They have this divine eye because they've achieved this higher mental state. We can't usually see them, but he would be able to see them. He also was able to see his past lives. And not past lives like, oh, this is like a cool trick or something like that, but more so he can understand essentially how this all plays into the existence and enlightenment and everything else, right? So the Buddha didn't want to know about his past lives to know about his past lives, is to get this he has this fundamental understanding, because now he understands that he can see it, right? And for us, we may be out of curiosity wanting to know about these past lives, but they are not us. It's that casual connection, these independent existences casually connected by karma and historic consciousness. Now the Buddha, he was able to look at his past lives, but he stops. He's like, it's pointless just going on. I mean, he could just go on and on and on and on and on and on, but he's like, what's the point? So we look at like the past tales of the Buddha, they're very much of him as like a bodhisattva or like morality conduct tales, because they're helping us understand how we should also shape our conduct and understand the Buddhist teachings in that way. But he wasn't going, I mean, we could probably fill entire scriptural canons just like with the past lives, but what was the point? And that's where the Buddha was as well. Like, what's the point? He didn't answer different things about the universe, right? He would ask different questions. Like he knew it, he understood it as a fully enlightened, awakened being, but he wasn't going to relay all of that because it wasn't beneficial to the teachings and to the practice of Buddhist practitioners. So we see that the Buddha is this fully awakened, enlightened being, has a really fundamental and understanding that we can't even fathom, where he's able to understand our universe at a level we have no clue about, but he was very selective on what was relayed. Now, this is all important because it's all intertwined with the teachings and how we practice. So again, whether you believe these were added later on, or whether it's true or not, or whatever, you can use them and understand them in a way that benefits your practice, your Buddhist practice, which is key. We're trying to break down this idea of self, which we believe is permanent, unchanging, and independent, and the Buddha said that's not true. So that's what we're trying to break down right now. So when we understand these realms of rebirth, periods of time, it's all really important. Now, one more thing we have inside Buddhist cosmology, and there's many different things, I'm barely covering any of it, are going to be Buddha fields or pure lands. And so this is big in Mahayana Buddhism or East Asian Buddhism. And so this is sometimes could be a school of Buddhism inside Mahayana, but it's also looked at as a type of practice inside Mahayana Buddhism as well. So, for example, in Chinese and Vietnamese Buddhism, for example, is intertwined with the meditation school, right? Zen, we might call it in the West. And so with that, it's not looked at as something separate, but very much as part of Buddhism in East Asia. And so what are Buddha fields and Pure Lands, right? So we look at Shakyamuni Buddha. He went to Parinirvana. He went to final nirvana, right? He's not in his manifested form here anymore on this earth. He's no longer able to teach people. And we saw during his time, he had many arhats, right? Many enlightened persons under his teachings, right? When he was alive. Now, what happened after he went to Parinirvana? You don't see that level of quote unquote success anymore. Do we have enlightened beings? Of course, but we don't see that Buddha field that he had around him, right? So you have, I'm talking about the three bodies of the Buddha. So we got, his Dharma body, but we've got this reward body, right? And so when we see this, there's this Buddha field, if you will, around him. You can think of it maybe in our modern world, and this is not an exact, correlation, but you see somebody very charismatic, right? And you're just kind of like caught up in that, well, that person, it's like the way they're talking and understanding, I'm just gravitating towards him, right? Not the same thing, but you can kind of see where I'm going with this. A Buddha field is this perfect, essentially, environment around a Buddha that allows one to become enlightened or progress more easily, if you will, on the path. Now, since we no longer have a Buddha manifested in our world right now, Shakyamuni is still our Buddha, we still are following his teachings, how do we become enlightened, right? It's becoming more and more difficult. And so it's gradually looked at inside Buddhism regards Theravada and Mahayana, this age of decline, right? And so this is just the norm. You have a Buddha who's manifested here, living here, but then you went to Parinirvana, and so you see enlightenment, just kind of like fall off, the teachings are gone, you wait for the next Buddha to come, manifested, and you just see this cycle, right? So there's very much cycles inside Buddhist cosmology, not just, with Buddhists, but our universe and everything else, right? So what we see in Mahayana is that Shakyamuni was one of many Buddhas. And we're looking very much just at our little earth right here. But you look inside Buddhist cosmology, like billion world systems, right? And so we're very much like, well, we know about our earth and we can speculate if there's life on other planets, right? But we don't really know. So in Buddhist cosmology, like there's plenty of life out there. There's Buddhas in many different, galaxies and universes and worlds, right? And so what we look at, and that's just in our very mundane, regular experience, but there's also different dimensions and everything else, right? So we have this very limited understanding of our universe and our existence, whereas in Buddhist cosmology, it's like, it's beyond that. And one of these are Pure Lands. So there's these different Pure Lands that a Buddha, and we sometimes call it celestial Buddhists in this context, where they can create this Pure Land where we, as part of rebirth, can be reborn into. And so when we're reborn into these Pure Lands, they are separated from this, basically what we call Saha world. So basically this is this regular mundane world, all the trappings of like pleasures and unhappiness and suffering and everything else like that, where it's harder to become enlightened. So when we go to these Pure Lands, we're able to learn under the guidance of living Buddha and also Bodhisattvas as attendants and Dharma teachers. And so this is a way where it may take us a long time still, depending on how much we've been practicing in this existence right now and our level of understanding, but we're going to be able to get to enlightenment there. And so the most popular one is Amitabha Buddha and his Western Pure Land. And these Pure Lands, they're said to be like in the West or the East and stuff like that, so we get these compass directions, right? But we're talking about just many, 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 many Pure Lands away. So there could be Pure Lands that are really close to us, and there are some, but you're still kind of like really close to this existence, if you will, this world. It's not really that 100% effective, but you want to get to, and the most popular one, as I mentioned, is Amitabha's one. And Amitabha's Pure Land, Western Pure Land, you're far away from that. You're in this perfect training environment. And the reason we have these Pure Lands, just think of them like a school. So right now we are kind of in and out of school, maybe your Buddhist practice, maybe go to temple, right? But we're kind of not in school most of the time, so we're not really advancing where we should be. When we go to the school, we have our professor right next to us, like pupil and professor, teacher right there, right? We're together. There's no 30 kids or whatever. It says one-to-one, right? In very much that context, where you're able to study and understand these teachings and understand and progress in this perfect training environment. It's like a training ground. And in Mahayana, the Mahayana path is the Bodhisattva path, and it's become a Bodhisattva to eventually become a full Buddha. And so these are training grounds to not just be a Bodhisattva, but to be a Buddha. And so, as I mentioned, there's many different worlds out there. So, right, what? We just know about our one Buddha right here, Shakyamuni, right? How would that actually play out with all these people? We're talking about infinite number of worlds we can't even see or imagine right now, right? Where one could become a Buddha. So you're inside these Pure Lands training to become a Buddha. Now, there's also different levels here. So we look at it as a very literal place inside Mahayana Buddhism. That's a literal place you can go to as part of rebirth. But it's also, especially in the traditions like, in Chinese and Vietnamese Buddhism, where it's intermingled with meditation school in many cases, you see that also as a development of the mind and of also your practice. For example, Amitabha Buddha is your inner Buddha nature. It's no different. And then the Pure Land, well, the Pure Land can be of your mind as well too. Almost think of it as like nirvana. So like if you have a Pure Land of your mind and Amitabha Buddha is your own Buddha nature, it's one and the same, right? So that's almost like the highest level. Most of us are not going to get to that level. That's a really hard thing to get to. So a lot of times, the best thing we can do is to hope to be reborn into Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land and to gain our practice that way. So that's a very, very popular practice inside East Asian Buddhism or Mahayana Buddhism that we see just practice all over. And you also see that in Central Asian Buddhism as well. So these are things that are part of Buddhist cosmology. And for Westerners, they can be very, very challenging to just accept or even understand, right? It doesn't mean you have to understand it right now, but they are part of the Buddhist traditions out there, in different ways and different understandings and different teachings based upon it. And we can just brush these off and go, well, is this really important? I'm just going to meditate, right? Well, are you meditating just for yourself in this existence right now? Because that's extremely limited in the whole Buddhist understanding and teachings and religion. So we're looking at what the Buddha taught and Bodhisattvas taught and other Buddhists taught, this bigger picture that is helping us understand why we are practicing, why we may be at this state right now, why this practice is important, why doing this is important, why. Whereas it becomes very hard to understand, especially as a Westerner, if you just go, well, I'm just going to meditate, or maybe I'll read some of the scriptures and I'll figure this out on my own and I'll be done in this lifetime. Okay, that's fine if you can actually accomplish it, but there's a bigger picture out there where your accomplishment you're trying to achieve, how does it fit into that bigger picture? Because that's a very limited view in that way. And it's not to be discouraging on your efforts. Our efforts to do this are really important, but to understand that this existence, this couple of decades we're here, this is just a pit stop, right? This is like we're going from town to town to town, hitchhiking town to town to town to town, right? So where do we want our next stop on this road to be? Do you want it to be in a place that's not conducive to your advancement on the path, or do you want it to be on a place that's conducive on the path? So that's why you see Buddhists very much focused on merit generation, making sure you're doing these wholesome karmic activities, because they don't want to fall, when those realms of rebirth, into the lower realms of rebirth. They want to stay either in the human realm where they can hear the Buddha's teachings, they can practice, they can change their karma, or advance up, because their goal, become an arhat in Theravada tradition, or become a bodhisattva, or eventually a full Buddha inside the Mahayana tradition. And this is the key, and this is why it's so important, and why it's a long path even inside Theravada. Not everybody's going to be parinirvana, in this lifetime. You even had in Buddhist times, there was like, you have to come back again, or maybe a couple of times, right? So even if you're at these levels, so we're seeing where it's not going to be, this is going to be done just right now. And I think that's, in my opinion, for Westerners, this desire for accomplishment, to have everything done in this particular lifetime. We're very used to that in our Western lifestyle and culture, but there's a bigger picture out there, and it can take some time, but that's not to be discouraging. When you let go and realize that and understand this bigger Buddhist cosmology, of which I didn't cover everything about, you become more relaxed into the understanding, I can do the best I can right now. I'm going to have that effort, determination on the Buddhist path, but I understand what I'm doing here is part of this bigger picture, this bigger path, that is continuing on and on and on, and I'm going to do my best to make sure I'm continuing on that right path. Do you have any questions about Buddhist cosmology? I would love to hear from you in the comments below, and make sure you check out my website, alanpeto.com, and I'll talk with you in our next episode. Thank you.